Speaker, the President of the United States.
The State of the Union speech, a public recitation of the NIE.
Saddam Hussein has gone to elaborate lengths, spent enormous sums, taken great risks to build and keep weapons of mass destruction.
It was all there. The aluminum tubes.
Our intelligence sources tell us that he has attempted to purchase high-strength aluminum tubes suitable for nuclear weapons production.
A controversial assertion that Saddam was buying nuclear material would become known as the 16 words.
The British government has learned that Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium from Africa.
The controversy would be called Yellow Cake. The CIA had examined the story.
No one is endorsing it. Everyone is saying it really does sound implausible.
We never took it seriously. I mean, we looked at it, but there was never any real substance.
The Vice President had heard of a Defense Intelligence report that the African nation of Niger had sold 500 tons of uranium, known as yellow cake, to Iraq.
He said, "This is important. This is interesting to me. Tell me about it."
I was briefed that an allegation had reached the office of the Vice President, and the office of the Vice President had asked the CIA to look into it. I knew a lot about uranium mining. I knew a lot about Niger.
The CIA sent Wilson to Niger. He found no evidence of a yellow cake sale. Yet it was put in the NIE.
A foreign government service reported that as of early 2001, Niger planned to send several tons of pure uranium, probably yellow cake, to Iraq.
There were serious questions raised about yellow cake, and that's why the people in the intelligence community advised the White House not to use it publicly. And that's why it was not used in the intelligence community's own unclassified product, because there were doubts about the credibility of the report that turned out to be fabricated.
Tenet in the past had worked hard to get yellow cake off the agenda, and he thought he had. But it had found its way into the NIE and been put in the State of the Union.
I know personally, when I listened to that State of the Union speech and I heard about uranium and yellow cake, I turned to the people I was with, my family, and said, we are going to war in Iraq.
May God continue to bless the United States of America.
The Vice President had been the driving force to this moment. Now, on the brink of war, one last stop. The Secretary of State. He was about to deliver the case against Saddam Hussein at the United Nations.
Powell gets a speech written by Scooter Libby, sent to him, and he's told, this is the kind of speech we would like you to give at the UN. It's very strange for the Vice President's senior advisor to be writing the speech and saying to the Secretary of State, this is what you should be saying.
Powell was skeptical of Libby's speech. He turned to Tenet for help.
He took the initiative to tell his staff, INR, and CIA, we're going to have to go through this. I don't like this. So his mind was already attuned to the fact that he wanted to make it better than he saw it.
Secretary Powell was not reluctant at all to throw things out completely. We threw the meeting between Mohammed Atta and Iraqi intelligence operatives in Prague out.
Powell and his senior staff spent the weekend at CIA headquarters.
I sat in the room looking into George Tenet's eyes, as did the Secretary of State, and heard with the firmness that only George could give it. And I don't mean terminology like slam dunk, although he was a basketball aficionado and used that kind of terminology a lot. But I mean eyeball-to-eyeball contact between two of the most powerful men in the administration, Colin Powell and George Tenet. And George Tenet assuring Colin Powell that the information he was presenting at the UN was ironclad.
But even at that time, inside the CIA, there were serious doubts about the accuracy of a central part of Powell's speech. It too had come from the NIE.
Baghdad has mobile facilities for producing bacterial and toxin BW agents. These facilities can evade detection and are highly survivable.
The source for this information was codenamed Curveball.
Curveball was a relative of a senior official of the INC, the Iraqi National Congress, headed by Ahmed Chalabi.
Curveball claimed that he was an engineer, young engineer out of the University of Baghdad, and among the things he had helped design, were this trailer, which was to be a mobile biological production facility.
His story had been given to the American intelligence network by the Germans, but they could not verify the accuracy of his claims.
For a service to say we have this source, and here's what he reports, but we can't vouch for it one way or another, that's a little, that should be a flag right there.
But as Curveball's allegations became a crucial part of the NIE, what few knew, including Secretary Powell, was that Curveball was the sole source for most of the information.
He was not told the truth when he was at the agency. When he was going over the data, he was told this was based on not one source, but multiple sources. One of the sources he was told it was based on was already known to be a fabricator. He was not told that the Germans had denied the U.S. access to it. He was not told that there had been warnings from the Germans that this guy was, to say the least, undependable alcoholic. So all the fine grain stuff that might have caused him even then not to use it, he wasn't given an opportunity to hear firsthand.
In February of 2003, Secretary Powell arrived at the United Nations to put his personal prestige on the line.
Colin Powell was the most powerful voice within the administration, cautioning against the dangers of going to war and the costs, human, political, diplomatic. At the end of the day, however, Colin Powell is a team player. He wasn't going to walk away from the administration on the eve of going to war, which was not only abandoning his commander-in-chief, but also the troops, many of which he still knew.
Let me turn now to nuclear weapons.
Powell insisted George Tenet sit in camera range right behind him. The usual allegations were made.
Saddam Hussein is determined to get his hands on a nuclear bomb.
Aluminum tubes.
That he has made repeated covert attempts to acquire high-specification aluminum tubes.
I think on the aluminum tubes, that test data was cooked, and it was portrayed upward in a very dishonest fashion.
Curveball.
We have first-hand descriptions of biological weapons factories on wheels and on rails. The source was an eyewitness, an Iraqi chemical engineer who supervised one of these facilities. He actually was present during...
George Tenet knew we had no agents inside Iraq. George Tenet knew that on the case of Curveball, no American had ever talked to Curveball directly. No American had been given his name by the Germans. And you go down the line, he knew the holes in the data.
And Powell used that information from Sheikh al-Libi, who was rendered and tortured in Egypt.
I can trace the story of a senior terrorist operative telling how Iraq provided training in these weapons to Al-Qaeda. Fortunately, this operative is now detained, and he has told his story.
But this information had been coerced out of al-Libi. Eventually, he would recant and admit he made it up.
Leaving Saddam Hussein in possession of weapons of mass destruction for a few more months or years is not an option. Not in a post-September 11th world.
A nighttime artillery barrage.
Marines shoot it out with Iraqi soldiers.
Push has been relentless.
In 3 weeks, it was over.
Scenes of free Iraqis celebrating in the streets, riding American tanks, tearing down the statues of Saddam Hussein in the center of Baghdad are breathtaking.
Cheney has a dinner at the residence and has his chief aide, Scooter Libby, Wolfowitz, Ken Edelman, and Cheney's wife. And it's a kind of celebration that they'd done it because we got it right. And they talked at that dinner about we're going to find weapons of mass destruction, don't worry, and it was a celebration.